Welcome back. I'm Bill. Got something a little bit different today. This is a Model 103 lantern made by the Akron Lamp Company. These were made in roughly the 1920s, probably starting around 1920. I'm not sure how late they made them. You've seen before in another video this Akron 132 AG. These were made during the 1930s. The patent for the valve was in 1930. And I'm not sure exactly how long they made them, but at least through the 30s, maybe into the early 40s. I don't know if they made them congruently, but this has what Akron called an Instaglow feature. It was their version of Coleman's Instant Light lantern, so you could crack the valve without it flooding, light it, and let it warm up, and then open the valve all the way, just like you would, say, on a 220 or a 228, which that's basically what this is, the equivalent. And you can look at that video, and I go into some detail on the valve, how it works, how it seems to be very over-engineered and overly complicated. But this is a neat lantern. This is, I guess you could say, its father, the 103. This would be Akron's equivalent of Coleman's Quick Light, and for the most part it's very similar. It's a very simple design, very elegant, works great, at least it should. As you can see, there is an S-shaped generator in here. This was Akron's version of Coleman's Q99 in a sense. Coleman's Q99 just has that round loop in it, and you can hold a couple matches under there for, say, 15 seconds, and that's enough to heat the generator so that it starts creating vapor and doesn't flood when you open the valve. This S generator does the same thing. So this is a match light. Before this, they had a Model 90, which was a torch light, just like Coleman had torch lights before the quick lights. The 103 also had a sibling that was made at the same time, as far as I know, the Model 107. The difference, they're identical, except, again, like the quick lights, you had the 327 that required an external pump and the 427 that had a built-in pump. The 103 has a fitting on the fuel cap for an external pump, just like a 327. And then the 107, otherwise identical, had a built-in pump. And I believe, as with the 427s, early ones stuck out and later ones were fully inserted into the fount. So, yeah, this is, I think, a neat lantern. It's got a little hanger for a vent nut. I believe this is supposed to have a vent nut similar to this. I'm not positive. These are probably unobtainium these days. You've seen this lantern before if you've watched my videos. When I picked it up and was traveling down in the States still, I really wanted to check out the side of the fount here. When I bought it, both I and the seller agreed that it had what was certainly about an inch long stress crack in the fount. And stress cracks are very, very common on these brass Akron founts. So, and this spot looked like a pinhole. I was just really curious. I didn't have an external pump for it handy, but I used my bike pump, put a good bit of pressure in it, dunked it in a bucket of water, and I was surprised that there were no bubbles. So I wanted to check this out and made a short video. If you watch that, I didn't have my usual supplies, so I just squirted some ketchup on the fount here to clean the crust off and to try to clean some of this corrosion off, and was rather pleased to discover that what felt like a stress crack, you could even run your thumbnail over it and feel it, was apparently just on the surface, and when the ketchup was on there for 15 minutes or so, it dissolved whatever it was and took it right off, and the metal's perfect underneath. And I'm guessing this isn't a pinhole. I'm guessing maybe something was stored next to it that was metal and they touched, and there was some sort of electrolysis going on and it stripped the nickel off. Yeah, this doesn't leak. I'll probably do another dunk test just to be sure, but I think it should polish up well, and that this also shows that when you polish a nickel fount, it's always a good idea to prep it with an acid bath of some kind to get this patina, this crust off of it, so that you can just go straight to polishing the nickel. Because if you try to polish this off, all of this crud, this grit, just ends up in your cloth or your polishing wheel, and that's going to scratch the nickel. So it's good if you can get that off first, but we'll get there when the time comes. So yeah, you'll notice the difference between these. One thing, I learned this recently. These square knobs were an advertising gimmick that Akron came up with apparently about 1930 when the 132 was released. You got a square deal with Akron, and so they had a square knob. That's in some of their old advertising literature, but this 1920s 103 predates it. And these came in variations over the years. The very early ones had a very squat, I mean they're round, but it's very squared edges on the vent, much shorter. And then they went to a vent this style. Some of them are nickel like this. Some of them are, I think later ones are enameled like this 132 vent. Also the founts were either nickel or some of them came painted as this. And I don't know if they used the same letters added to the model number as they did on the 132s. The 132G was nickel, and the G stands for that it runs on gas. And then this is a 132AG, which the A stands for painted. So I don't know if this would be a 130 or a 103G or if they just referred to it as a 103. I haven't been able to find that kind of information. But anyways, I'm going to get the camera repositioned here so you can see better, and we'll tear into this guy. So here we go. We'll start with the vent nut. These things just thread and thread and thread. Right, there we go. Take the vent off. See, this is in many ways like a quick light vent. It's got a, I guess you call it a rivet that holds the two pieces together, but they spin. This is brass, and it's got nickel plating over it. It'll be interesting to see how it polishes up. I can see it's fairly yellow to begin with, so the nickel plating may be fairly worn, but we'll find out. These are hard to polish, or I should say they're hard to polish without removing all the nickel. And then the way these come apart, I would assemble this the other way, but someone did this because of the direction of the generator. But these are very much like the 132. We've got this thumb nut, I guess you call it, down here. You just unscrew that, and then the whole burner assembly slides up, and there's a notch here, a channel, and you just take it off. And this is pinned, so we can't take this part off. But we should be able to take the burner tubes off. I don't know if we actually need to, but I would like to do that for polishing. I've got some tape wrapped pliers, and we'll just try to see how tight these are. And if that doesn't want to work, we'll probably have to do some heating and quenching. That one doesn't seem to want to move. Probably nice and tight. Yeah. I don't want to damage those. So what I'll do is I'll heat and quench this top part and see if we can get those off. There's not much to these. Again, this is like the 132. We just take a 1/2-inch wrench, put it on here. We undo this nut. I don't know if this was dropped or what, but the collar's sitting crooked, and find out here shortly. But you see this channel, the generator fits through there, so we just slide that past the nut and lift it right off. Now, the collar has a notch. Let's take that off. There are a couple ways we could go from here, depending on how stuck this generator is. I'm going to put these nuts down out of the way so I can, let's get that straight. Let me get these out of the, it doesn't want to line up very well. See, it keeps threading and crooked. There we go. Depending on how tight this generator is, because I don't want to break it, and the generator, it's threaded on, the brass tube is just threaded on the end and threads straight in. Again, just like the baseball bat generator on the 132. From what I've read in the documentation for these, they recommended putting some soap on the threads when you screwed it in, just so you could get it snug enough. we'll see if I can twist this and see if it comes out. Yeah. Okay. So we could try pliers, but I don't want to squish this, and it looks like someone's already tried that at some point. So here's my trick on these. So here's what I'm going to do. With the vise, I can get a grip on this whole curved part and on this part, so that this doesn't twist and so that this doesn't twist or turn. That's good. And I'm watching closely to make sure, oh, there we go. It didn't take very much to break that free. I might have been able to do that with my hands. There we go. So you can see here. All right, so you can see the generator is, the end of the tube is just threaded. So this is not like a Q99, a Coleman, where it's flared or flanged at the end and actually has a threaded fitting that actually is steel and takes the brunt of all that force. So these are, again, similar to a Q99, but there are some differences. A Q99 has asbestos packing in the loop. This, as far as I know, has no packing in it. The tip does come off. And so that's just the generator right there, and see, we can blow through it pretty easily, so that's a really good sign. I think this generator shouldn't be a problem. And then they have this filter. It's a brass mesh, and it just pulls out of there. My suggestion on these is don't try to unroll it, leave it as it is, soak it or spray it in carburetor cleaner to make sure it's clean. Chances are this actually, it's black, but I think it should be just fine, and then we'll spray some carb cleaner through the jet as well. Now we can take this burner retainer nut off. We'll remember the flanged part goes down. Go ahead and take this frame retainer nut off. And let's get the valve out. And for this, I'm just going to use a large crescent wrench. Just going to put it on the back, so when I'm pushing on it, I'm pushing against this. And these are, as far as I know, the Akrons are not overly fragile, and some of the non-Coleman manufacturers, you do this, and the valves are prone to snapping off in the fountain. The Akrons, I don't think so. And oh, it's tight, but it's not bad. I expected to have to fight with it more than that. All right, there's our valve. And the last thing on the fount is do the easy part. We'll take the pump fitting off. And all right, let me get my handy dandy protector for this. All right, we're gonna have to take this off with pliers. So how do we keep from chewing up the knurling on the outside or scraping it up? Really simple. I've seen some complicated devices, but this is really simple. This is a finger off a leather work glove. We'll just put that on there, and I'll double up the protection with my tape wrapped pliers. There we go. Nice and easy. Now, this looks like it should come apart, but this is peened in there, swaged in there somehow. So this does not come apart. I don't know if you can hear that. There's a little ball bearing in there. That's the check valve, and it's rattling, so that's a good sign. I already know because I put pressure in this and it held that this works well. So there's our fount. Oh, a little bit of dust coming out. Set that aside. Last thing is the valve. It actually turns, so that's good, but I'm going to make sure everything here is good and clean, and so I'm going to go ahead and take this apart. And you'll notice, like some of the early quick light valves on the lanterns and the lamps, this doesn't have a stop on it. So in theory, you could have the thing running and turn this. I mean, I don't know why anybody would do that, but you could in theory turn this all the way out and release the fuel through here and cause a fire. That's one reason why the later lanterns and lamps, they put stops on these things so that you couldn't do that. And I believe this is a 3/8. And this may require new valve packing. These are kind of notorious for failed valve packing, but we'll see when we put it back together. This looks okay. It may just, yeah, it looks okay. So hopefully it's all right. We won't need to do anything with that, but we might. And that's the valve. These are really simple. You've got your valve stem runs in through the side here, and because this is like a quick light, it's just an open pickup tube. So there's not much to go wrong in these valves. That's why these things are just so reliable. If there's anything that's going to go wrong, it's going to be a clog in the generator. And these Akron generators don't have the packing in them, so they're less likely to clog than the Coleman's are. So that's all the parts taken apart. Got a bin, not a whole lot here. So our next step is to put these in some citric acid and get them soaking away, bubbling away, and cleaning, remove the gunk. And while I get that started, I'm going to go ahead and try to heat and quench this and see if I can break these burner tubes free so we can make sure everything's clean inside there. So I will see you in the kitchen. Small parts, most of them brass, because you want to try to keep brass and steel parts or nickel-plated parts separate as much as you can, are in this small pan. I've got some citric acid powder mixed into the water. This is what I use. I get it at a beer and winemaking supply store. I put in about a teaspoon per liter of water. And the one thing with this that I want to be careful of, I've put the valve back together for now. I don't want too much of the boiling to go on with the graphite packing. I want that protected. So I've over-tightened the packing nut. I put the valve stem back in so that it's protecting the graphite from being saturated with the citric acid solution. I'm just going to leave that nut in there long enough to remove some of the crud that's on it. Then I'm going to take that out and put the parts in there by themselves. Now next door over here in the larger pot, I've got our fount, and nickel-plated parts like this and the vent, I'm wanting to be careful. The solution is the same, about a teaspoon per liter of water. Nickel plating can come off this way. I've never had a problem with that, but I will keep a close eye on it. About 20 minutes, I'll take it out and I will rub it very lightly with a 4/0 steel wool just to clean it. And see if we're done. You could just wrap paper towels around this, soaked in the solution, and that would do the job as well, but I'd like to clean the inside of the fount too, so I've just immersed the whole thing. Once that's out, then I'll put the vent and the other larger parts and steel parts into this pot and de-rust them with the citric acid too. So I'll see you when that's done. Right, so here's the fount. It's come out of the citric acid bath. I think it looks pretty good, but I need to rinse it and I need to give it a very light scrub. Scrub may not even be in the right word, but I'll basically wipe it down with this 4/0 steel wool. Very, very fine steel wool. I don't want to scratch it. I just want to rub what's been loosened by the acid bath. I want to rub that off. So you see that one spot where the nickel, what we thought was a pinhole, That crust is all gone. The acid dissolved that. The other thing I want to do is make sure that all of that acid has been removed. There's a lot of crud, almost an oily residue around the fuel cap opening. And we'll scrub that a little bit. The bottom I'll scrub a bit more. That doesn't have the same type of plating on it. I'm not worried about scratching that. And we'll give it a good rinse. See, there's a little bit of grit in there. I'll rinse it and point it out until what comes out is nice and clear. For a roughly 100-year-old spout, that looks pretty darn good. Clean sink so we can see what's coming out. Probably one more time we'll do it. I'm going to give the vent a similar treatment. The nickel on the vent can be fragile. What happens is the brass gets hot. When brass gets hot, it turns dark, which is why on these and on the quick lights, the vents are often virtually black. That is the nickel underneath, or the brass underneath the nickel has turned dark, and of course the nickel gets dirty too. So you can polish it, but getting it looking new, I think we need to rinse a little bit more. Getting it to look completely like new is usually not possible. The problem is that the nickel plating is very thin. I know some folks like to replate them, and they put the nickel on really thick so that you can actually use the lantern and it doesn't turn dark on you. Alright, I think that's good. I don't see anything else coming out. So I'm going to dry that off, and then I'm going to swish some methyl hydrate in there. The alcohol will absorb any water that's inside, and that will dry it out. So I'll see you when I've got that set up. Right, let's put some methyl hydrate in here. If you live in the States, you can buy this. They usually sell it as denatured alcohol. They're not exactly the same thing, but up here they seem to use the terms interchangeably. So let me drag you over here to the sink. And this should absorb any remaining water. And sometimes it cuts remaining stuff in there that the citric acid didn't. Maybe we might dump this out and it might be blue or green. But no, I found it's clean. Just going to let this drip, and that should be good to go. The next step is to give it a polish at the polishing wheel. Now I'm going to rinse these, the smaller parts, and we'll move on to the bigger parts in a bit. I'm not going to show you everything, but I'll show you how we wipe these down with steel wool and just flush the citric acid off. Again, this is 4/0 steel wool, very fine, so it doesn't scratch. clean this out. Make sure our fuel system is all clean. Actually steel. This is our vent nut loop. I know some people comment on these videos. They have a heart attack with me doing this over the sink drain, and there's a reason why I do it on this side with the garbage disposal. I've never actually dropped anything down there. But if I were to do so, I could simply reach down and pick it out. There's not much can go through the garbage disposal. If I dropped it on the other side, I'd have to fish it out of the P-trap. Now that's not fun. But just to quell your fears, no, I've never dropped anything down there. Not yet. And the generator. Too worried about this, it'll be all sooty the first time we light it up. Mainly, I want to make sure that this thing is clear. It passes dripping water. So, what I'm going to do is blow some water through it. So you see I can blow water through there. As slow as the water flows through there, I'm thinking there has to be some kind of packing in here. That's how a Q99 works. But the key is if you can blow water through there, then fuel under pressure from the fountain is going to have no trouble. And if this doesn't work, if you can't blow water through there or even air, then I recommend having a look at my Q99 restoration video. You can heat and quench these and then keep blowing water through it and just keep heating and quenching until you can blow water through it. That should be good to go. Alright, I managed to get the burner tubes off of this. It took a bit of heating and quenching to get the joints broken loose, and the reason why I want to do that is because bugs like to climb up into these tubes, usually go up through the bottom here. They'll build nests in here, spider webs, mud daubers can get in there, and they'll cut off your air supply. So if you can, you need to get in there. I don't see anything in there, but using these round brushes works really well. You can watch how much stuff comes out of there. Maybe I need to put the brush up further. Usually we do this and all sorts of black stuff just comes out. And you can see some of it. Everything was so tight I didn't bother to get the burner caps off. I can still get a brush in here. Be careful when you do this not to poke the end through the mesh screen in the end here. There's a mesh screen on top of these burner caps. Just rub these down with steel wool. And you should polish that pretty nicely. sometimes these have ceramic burner caps on them. I don't know if the 103 does. The 132 occasionally comes with ceramic burner caps, and if you have those, it's okay to boil them like this. But the one thing, I learned this the hard way years ago with a Coleman ceramic burner cap, before you put it on the lantern and fire it up, you need to make sure that ceramic is bone dry. So dry it in the oven at 250, 300 degrees. Otherwise, as soon as it starts heating up with the mantle, little bits of porcelain will start shooting off all over the place, and the whole thing will break up as the water that's in it expands. Alright, so that gives you some idea. I'll finish up here. Here's the polishing setup. I've got a buffing wheel here. I'm using this white number 5 compound, and see, I'll get the fount on there. We'll do that first, and I think it'll turn out pretty well. Starting to shape up pretty nicely. That looks pretty amazing considering what it looked like. We'll use a soft rag and some methyl hydrate to get some of this residue off. And once I've done that, then if there are any spots that I need to hit again, I can do that. But let's move on to the vent. The nickel on this is probably thinner and more fragile. You can see the brass is showing through pretty much all through the perforated part. So I'll polish that up a bit, but it's usually very easy to burn through the nickel on these, and this is almost certainly not going to shine like the fount did because the vent just takes so much wear and tear from the heat. But we'll see what we can do. You know, that's better than I expected. When we started, it looked like there was a lot of yellow brass showing through, but that's pretty good. That gives you an idea of what we can do. that that's much better than I anticipated it would end up being. So yeah, I'm really happy with that. I think once we clean it up and wipe it down with a rag and get all the residue off, it'll look really nice. This color is kind of rough. It had a lot of rust on it. A lot of the nickel plating was rusted away. But I think we can get it looking all right. Said it's pretty rough, but I think that's a significant improvement. Here's that air tube and manifold. This would unscrew as well, but mainly I'm interested in getting in there to make sure there are no spider webs or insect nests, or as I found in some cases, just dead insects. That gives you an idea of what the polishing wheel can do. And so I'm going to finish up these other parts, and I'll meet you back when we're ready to reassemble everything. We are ready for reassembly, and this thing turned out really nicely. Shined up nice. Our little spot of crust that looked like a pinhole is not a pinhole. I don't know what happened there, but there's a little spot of bare brass. There's a little bit of brass exposed around the top where the plating was really thin and where it had worn through. But I think this is going to look great. The vent, same situation. It polished up much nicer than I thought. There are a few places with the plating very thin and the brass is showing through in a couple of spots. But it came out really nicely. And even our burner frame that was completely covered in surface rust, most of the plating's gone, but it cleaned up nicely as well. So we're ready to put this back together. So we'll start with the simple stuff. We'll put the cap back on, and now let's put the valve back together. I don't know why, but I polished the pickup. Oh, and my glove's tearing. So we're gonna put this back on. Oh, and some of the graphite's coming through there. Oh, if we need to, we can replace that later. Close the valve, and then we will cinch the go tighter than that. I think that's going to be good. It should seal there. Now, I'm going to put the generator on before I put this back in the fount, because I'll probably use the vise to get the generator clocked properly. Screw all the way down. This is the cage retainer, and then this is the air tube and manifold that always wants to go on crooked. There we go. And those thread down nicely now that all these threads are cleaned out. So let's set that down and get our generator. We've got the tip, which I've cleaned out, and I can actually blow air or blow a stream of water through that, so that's really good. And I've cleaned up the little filter. We'll put that back in. I think this generator is going to be good to go. And to ease getting it installed, because it's just threaded, it's not like a Coleman Q99 or R55 with a steel fitting down there. Akron said to use a little piece of, or not a little piece of soap, to use soap and puts a little bit on the threads. So I'm going to do that, and that should ease getting this installed properly, because we don't want to torque down on this and then just twist the generator. So what I want, this was backwards when I installed it. It really doesn't matter, it's more aesthetic, but if I want this in the back, opposite the valve wheel. It was in the front, so I want it in the back, which means this is the back of the generator, so I need that facing this side. And it needs to be tight, so yeah, I'm going to use the vise on this. Okay, so we've got our vise here. I want the valve opposite this part. Make sure we're holding the entire generator in there good and tight. So make sure I'm not turning or twisting. And that's down. That should be good. There we go. We've got the back opposite the valve knob, and it's in there good and tight, so I don't think it'll leak. Okay, the fount's back. I like to use this thread locker. This is a tapered brass thread into a brass fitting. It shouldn't leak if it's tight. The problem is when you want to get it clocked properly, once it's been taken apart, sometimes it's not quite as tight as it once was when it's in the proper clocked position. So I'm going to put a little bit of this on there, and this ensures that even if I don't get it quite as tight as I want, not that I won't get it tight, but if it's not quite as tight as I would like, that thread sealant will fill the gaps and ensure that we don't have a leak. We can get it threaded. This shouldn't be this difficult. There we go. We want it opposite the filler cap. And a little bit further. Now that's too far. This is why the thread locker is, or the thread sealant is helpful. I think that's just right. Okay, so let's put our burner assembly together. This is nice and simple. Just thread these tubes back in. Make sure they're tight. Okay, that's not going anywhere. This is threaded in, but there's a pin driven in here, so this isn't going to come apart. This is all one piece here, and this is peened or swaged in somehow, so this wasn't going to come off. So, but I still think we got that shined up pretty nicely. So next, let's put our collar on and get the cage on. Centered, and now there's a nice little cutout here for the the generator, and this is the hole where air is drawn up through the collar into the air tube. Just tighten this one down. Get that one out of the way. And make sure we're level. I think this thing was a little bit off kilter to start with. That's about right. Half inch wrench. And that'll hold that in place. And now our burner. And when you slide it down, you got to make sure the generator ends up in the hole. And this thing always wants to go on crooked. Let's see if I can do this so I'm not blocking your view. It's crooked. It leans toward the front or it leans toward the back. Got to get it perfectly straight. I think that's it. There we go. I think the 132 has the same problem. And that's just thumb tight. All right, I'm going to lose those bad parts. Before we go any further, let's put some mantles on here. These aren't vintage silk lights, but they're silk lights. And I think this is deserving of some silk lights. These are brighter than the modern mantles because they're impregnated with thorium, which is slightly radioactive. It's not a problem for the end consumer, but I guess if you work in the factory around it all the time, it's probably not good. So they stopped making mantles with thorium and now they use yttrium. And the mantles just aren't the same quality as they used to be either. So for an old one like this, it's always worth the silk lights. Always snip your mantle strings off. If you don't, they have a nasty habit when they shrink or get burned, they curl down and they inevitably end up poking a hole in the side of your mantle. The other option, if you don't want to use the current Coleman mantles, which aren't great quality, Peerless makes a decent mantle that is a stand-in for these number 21s. They're still not as bright as the old ones, and they're not as durable, but they are better than the current Coleman ones, I'm sorry to say. So we've got our mantles on there. We're leaning a little bit. Let me pull that over. Tighten that down. And this is not an Akron chimney, but this is a Coleman chimney. An Akron would look pretty much the same, but instead of a solid metal lighting door like this, it's a metal frame with another piece of mica in the middle of it. Getting that lined up. There we go. Tighten that on. Get things lined up and then tighten that down. There we go. I need to gas this up and I will burn those mantles in, and when I come back we will give it its first fire up. We are ready to light this up. I've got gas in here. I've pumped it up with the external pump. Our mantles are burned in, so I'm going to take 2 matches just like on a quick light, hold them together, strike them, hold them under there for, well, until they're about ready to burn my finger. Hopefully they actually keep going that long. Sometimes you have to angle them down to keep them going. There we go. Let's add a little bit of pressure to this. Put it back around. And there we go. An Akron 103, 1920 sometime, probably, I don't know, maybe 1923 to 1929, somewhere in there, just based on the vent design and variations and all of that. This might be one of my new favorites. So hope you enjoyed the video, and I'm going to cut the light out, and we'll see you next time.